And welcome back to Nerdy Nerds. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been away for 10 days. I basically have started a new job, and truth be told, I'm absolutely hanging. It's been crazy to go back to work from just making content for the last 6 months, but I have also been streaming on Twitch, so I've played the whole of Wukong over on Twitch, and I've just recently then gone back and platinumed it, and truth be told, guys, the game is absolutely phenomenal. So today is all about comparing Wukong to Shadow of the Erdtree, because the Game of the Year awards are coming up in, I think, December, and both games are eligible for nominations, as you wouldn't expect the DLC to be able to be nominated in Shadow of the Erdtree. However, it is actually a eligible game to win Game of the Year, which is crazy, but they are competing head to head, and they're probably the front runners. There are other games in the mix, but I think these two are probably the front runners for Game of the Year. So I want to go through today and compare the two titles, and I have like a big list of categories. I think I have 10 categories that we're going to compare both games in, and at the end of it, we're going to come together and have an idea of what we think is the game that should win Game of the Year. So let's get into it. Let's start right now. Remember, guys, to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content, and like the video if you like the video. I'm going to get into it, and let's start with category 1. So category 1 is all about the visuals, how the game looks, and I'll be honest with you, both games do look absolutely stunning. There is a style to Shadow of the Erdtree that kind of fits, obviously, with the Elden Ring style, that is almost realism, but kind of has a tad bit of a cartoony effect to it, like an anime effect, and it is a really nice looking game. And then it goes over to Wukong, which has like a realistic look at characters that wouldn't fit in the real world. So they've really kind of brought these characters to life, and I think it works really quite well. But who do I think has done it better? And if I'm being honest with you, there's ways around this and ways that I think that they need to be compared. So if you look at the world of Shadow of the Erdtree, and we're going to ignore Elden Ring as a whole. So as like Elden Ring as a title, ignore that, we're only talking about the DLC. The majority of the Lands of Shadow, they are quite dulled down. They have their brightened areas, and there's some areas that are really kind of quite vibrant and look really quite nice when you come up to like the parts where you have all of the flower beds and like the blue flowers that kind of cover the whole area. There are parts of that map that look absolutely stunning, but Wukong overall, I think, has just this brilliance of a visual. Like, if you remember playing God of War 2019 for the first time, and just the visuals of that game, I think Wukong kind of compares with that massively. Like, it really is a good looking game. So when you're playing through it, everything around you just looks absolutely stunning, and it really does sort of drag you into the world. Not saying for a second the Shadow of the Erdtree looks bad or doesn't drag you in, but I think the visuals of Wukong just pip it just ever so slightly, in the fact that it looks realistic enough that I feel like I could be sat there and look at it myself. And then you have obviously the meditation spots that really sort of show you the highlights of the map. I really think the visuals of Wukong are right up there, and obviously it is Unreal Engine 5, so you expect it to look that little bit better, and obviously I think your character does kind of look a little bit crisper on the screen, as much as I think that the customization element, and we'll get into that later, of the visuals within Shadow of the Erdtree do look really nice also. I just think this point has to go to Wukong, just for the sheer fact that it just looks absolutely stunning, and it really does look next gen. So the first point is going to go to Wukong. Category 2 is exploration. Now, when we go to the world of Wukong, it is, like I said, a really good looking world, which makes it even more disappointing that there are invisible walls almost everywhere. And the frustrating thing about Wukong's invisible walls is that once you come up to an invisible wall, it kind of puts you off going towards other elements of exploration later on down the line, because there's parts that look like they're clear openings and clear areas that you can go down, but they're not. They're an invisible wall, which means then later on you come to a different map and you think, oh, I might be able to go there, and you think, well, no, I'm not going to bother trying because it's probably an invisible wall. So it kind of snowballs into this not wanting to explore so much because you feel like everything's going to be an invisible wall. And I remember there was one point where I had missed a meditation spot behind a fence because I went to jump over the fence and I got caught on a tree. But in my mind, it was an invisible wall, so I never went back again. And then later on, I found out that it was actually I jumped into a tree. But it instantly felt like, oh, invisible wall, I'm not going to bother. So there is an undying hatred for invisible walls when it comes to Wukong, and unfortunately, it gets dragged into this. And then when you look at Shadow of the Erdtree, if you see something, you can go and touch it. It is just levels upon levels upon levels better at being an exploration experience. Like, it is such an exploration because obviously it follows the pattern of Elden Ring, and it is just pure exploration. You could spend hours in the game without even seeing an enemy and just going along and exploring parts of the map. So I think this point doesn't even need to be contested. It is clear as a day. Clear as a day? It is clear as day. Shadow of the Erdtree gets this point. Like, it isn't even close. So category number 2 goes to Shadow of the Erdtree. Category 3 is the story. Now, the story in both games are extremely different, but of course, Shadow of the Erdtree is continuing on from the story of Elden Ring. And for me, it kind of felt like they took a bit of a left turn with a lot of the storytelling that we wanted to get. For example, a lot of people wanted stories on Godfrey, and they were just like, there was a sneaky little hint at him that wasn't even part of the story. It was just in one of the two of the catacombs, actually. The story of Shadow of the Erdtree is a really good story. Don't get me wrong. Once you read into it and you hear about Messmer and its connection to Marika, and just going down the line of why then you've got Miquella with Radahn. Like, it is a really good story, but for me, it kind of felt like it took a left turn from what people wanted, and I think that is kind of where I sit with Shadow of the Erdtree. Great story, but it just wasn't. It was like Game of Thrones episode or series 8, series 8 or 9. What I think series 8, isn't it? Where Bran gets to be the be all and end all, and you kind of feel like, why did they go down this direction? Yeah, I really enjoyed Shadow of the Erdtree, but when I went back to do like the lore sort of deep dives and stuff, it kind of felt like I would have liked it to go in different directions. Not to say that it was bad, it's just I felt like there was elements that I would have liked different, and that's all it is. Whereas you come to the world of Wukong, and truth be told, it was like a storybook. It was told to us in just a really easy fashion. It was really nice, and there were parts of every chapter that once you finish the chapter, you get an animation. And every animation is either animated by a different person or they are just animated in different styles. And truth be told, that was the most like next level thing for me. Like, it was just something that I've never seen before done in that manner. Like, obviously every game is animated and every cutscene is animated, but the way they told the story in between the chapters was so fresh and just so like cool in its own way that I can't for a second, being someone who is a huge fan of animation, I can't for a second give this point to Shadow of the Erdtree. I think Wukong overall gave us the story on a silver platter, which, don't get me wrong, I love the way that FromSoft tell their stories through all the items, and you have to dig deep to actually find out what's going on. I love that, and it has given me an opportunity to make content. So I've got no issue with that whatsoever. However, coming from Elden Ring, and then Shadow of the Erdtree, and then Dark Souls, it was really refreshing to just have a story told to me and not have to go looking for it, and kind of just feel like I was in a movie in a sense. Like, I played through a movie, and then every now and then I got to just sit back and relax and just watch the movie play out. And that for me was really, really refreshing. So this point for me goes to Wukong. I think, again, this can be debated, and I'm more than happy for you guys to go in the comments and give me what you guys think. And if anything, I'd like you to go through each category and see which game you would give the point to. But I think story-wise, I think Wukong gets the cake. Obviously, it is a well-known story anyway, but I think the way it was told was just really, really well done. So, yeah, category 3 goes to Wukong. So category 4 is the combat. Now, both games have an epic amount of combat. There is unreal amounts of enemies. Everywhere you go, you're fighting. Wukong, I would argue, you're almost constantly fighting. It goes like boss to boss to boss to boss to boss. Like I said earlier on, the exploration isn't huge, so it kind of does feel like you're falling into a boss fight every 2 minutes. Whereas obviously Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is a lot more spread out. You have a lot more area to go around, and so you don't feel like you're constantly going into a boss battle, which is lovely, which is really, really nice. However, how do I feel when it comes to the combat within the games? Now, I think there's a way to look at this that I think is fair for both games, and I'm going to explain it as FromSoft have been doing this, for a long time, for about, 20 years now, making just like the Demon Souls and Dark Souls and go on forth. They've got a lot of practice in this, whereas the creators of Wukong have, this is their first experience of making a AAA title. Like, this is their first go at a game like this. So overall, I think it is fair to say that they wouldn't be so versed in making a fighting game work as fluid as Shadow of the Erdtree. That being said, Wukong still plays incredibly well. So when you're fighting, obviously you have your perfect dodges and it creates a duplicate of yourself, and it really feels epic when you get it right, and it really feels quite cool. And then obviously you have all of your spells, you have your transformations, you have all of that stuff that really does fit in and make the combat much more varied than you would expect from just pressing square and triangle. However, there really is no competing with a company that has been doing it for as long as they have. The fluidity within Shadow of the Erdtree, the dodging just feels a lot smoother, it feels correct, it feels like you're not being sort of done over when you feel like you've done a dodge that should have missed. Don't get me wrong, there's still moments where you think, well, that shouldn't have hit me, but that's just a FromSoft way of doing things. But the fluidity alone is amazing. The just expanses of weapons and spells that you can do creates this sort of differentiation, is that even a word? It just creates a new way of playing every time you play. There really is no one way to play Shadow of the Erdtree, and that means then the combat itself is varied in every aspect. So I love that. I think Shadow of the Erdtree gets this point without a shadow of a doubt. That's fun. That accidental pun, maybe. But yeah, I think Shadow of the Erdtree definitely gets the point on this, and I don't want to take anything away from Wukong and the developers for it. I think they've done an impeccable job, but they're just not quite there yet, and that will come with time. But overall, Shadow of the Erdtree gets this category. Now we're going to get into something that I think is quite controversial, and that is boss design. So, overall, when it comes to Shadow of the Erdtree, there are a lot of repeated bosses from the base game, which, don't get me wrong, there is also a ton of new bosses, and they all look really, really nice, they all look really, really cool, but I think there's some standout bosses that are far beyond others. For example, Mesmer. I think Mesmer is so well designed. I think he's a really, really nice looking boss. There is a helicopter above me. Right, I think we're safe. The helicopter was outside for about 20 minutes and just kept going over and over, and this is the first time I've ever been stopped recording a video by a helicopter, so tick that off my bucket list, but well annoying. Anyway, Mesmer, brilliant game design, brilliant boss design, loved the fight, thought it was wicked. Romina, I think her name is, Romina of the Bud, again, looks phenomenal. I think she is like an upgrade from a Dark Souls 1 boss. Get into that in another video. But again, brilliant game design, brilliant boss design, had a few moments that I thought she was a bit annoying, but overall I think she was brilliant. Who else? There's a few. There's a few bosses that I thought were really nice, and then you have enemies like Gaius. Wasn't a big fan of Gaius. Again, a bit of a redesign from Dark Souls 1, but we'll get into that in another video. Then you've also got Radahn, which was obviously copy and paste Radahn, but then they gave us a new skin of Radahn, which, again, nice enough. It fit the story that they were trying to tell, but again, that was a story that I felt could have been done differently. But either way, there was a lot of repeated bosses and a lot of really nice looking bosses. So overall, it's quite a mixed bag of enemies when it comes to Shadow of the Erdtree. But then if we look at Wukong, there are repeated enemies. For example, the frogs are repeated in every single chapter. But you also have some enemies that were sort of standalone enemies that really, really looked really quite cool and really obviously were from the stories that were brought to life in such a way that I thought was brilliant. And like I said, every time anyone does well in something, it doesn't mean the other one is doing bad. It just, for me, and this is all my opinion, it feels just a little bit more special on the end of Wukong on this basis. And I'm going to give it to you straight. If we're talking about base game bosses, just regular old bosses, I think they're quite evenly stacked. I think they're both very close by. I think when it comes to the game designs for the bosses, I think they're both quite similar. Obviously, the bosses for most chapters, especially the final bosses in the chapters, I think 1, 2, 4 and 5, I might have that wrong, they have special items to help you beat them. There are specific items that will help you beat that boss. And that is a nice feature, really cool feature. But generally, the bosses looked really quite cool. And I think they also kind of fit the vibe of, if you're looking at Shadow of the Erdtree, they also look quite cool. So they're both a very mixed bag and quite even in that element. However, there is one boss fight that I think takes Wukong, above and beyond the comparableness of these two games and their boss designs, and that is when you do the secret ending for Wukong. And the secret ending boss, bear in mind, one of the hardest bosses I've ever done, and I've done Elden Ring multiple times, I've done Shadow of the Erdtree twice, I've also done Dark Souls 1, and obviously I'll go on and go further forward, but it really is, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's not the hardest, but he's up there with some of the hardest. Like, he was nails. But once you beat him and move on to the next little mini boss fight, it's not a mini boss fight, it's an epic boss fight. One of the coolest things I've ever done in the game ever. Honestly, it was so cool, I was gobsmacked. And I'm so happy that I didn't see a spoiler for it, because it was just absolutely one of the coolest boss fights I've ever been a part of, and it just kept getting better and better and better. So for me, Wukong gets the cake on this category for that boss fight alone. Everything else, I think they're quite even pegging, and I'd almost even give it to Shadow of the Erdtree slightly when it comes to just the regular bosses. But when it comes to the end game bosses, and especially the secret ending, Wukong absolutely flies ahead. I think it is absolutely the most cool boss fight ever. And if you've done it, let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. I really think it's an experience that you need to experience yourself to really get a feel of just how cool it is. The boss fight for the secret ending wins this category for Wukong without a shadow of a doubt. Right, so the next category is customization, and I think we all know where this is going to go. Don't get me wrong, Wukong has a lot of armors, it has a lot of weapons, but all of the weapons are obviously the same weapon with a bit of a variance. So you are playing it differently, and you do have different stances that you can use those weapons differently. But overall, you are kind of limited to what you can use. You have big sticks, and they are really cool, but they are big sticks. And then when you come to the armor, the way the armors look are phenomenal. Like, absolutely phenomenal. Especially when you get the end game armor, and also there's another armor from one of the secret endings. Just absolutely one of the coolest pieces of armor I've ever seen in a game. Cool as hell. Absolutely wicked looking. You are a suave-ass monkey. But if we then compare that to Shadow of the Erdtree, it's not even close, guys. It isn't even slightly close. If you see an enemy with an item or armor, you can probably have that item or armor. Like, there is no limit to what you can do. You have unlimited weapons. You have, like, just categories upon categories upon categories of enemies. No, enemies, of weapons. You also have just a huge range of spells that you can use that all have their own, like, magical sort of foundations to them. Then you have just an unreal amount of armor and customization. You can also create your own character and also then go back and edit your character. The customization isn't even close. Like, it's worlds apart. But I think that also comes from just the sheer fact of the company that it's made by, and they're always just so just happy to give you this customization, which I think is just such a brilliant thing that FromSoft do. And I can't give it enough credit. It really is just a really nice aspect of a game that if you see something, you can probably have it. And I love it. And that means that for not even a shadow of a doubt that Shadow of the Erdtree gets the cupcake for the customization. And not to take anything away from Wukong, it is a far more limited game than Shadow of the Erdtree when it comes to this, but it really does stand out with the fact that you can literally have anything that you see, and I think that is a really special thing that any FromSoft game seems to have, and I love it. So yeah, this category, not even close, Shadow of the Erdtree gets the point. And then we're going to talk about performance. Right, I'm going to lay the scene here, because I have to. Shadow of the Erdtree is like 100% open world. There's no loading zones, like none. There might be elements where like you have a cutscene that is clearly trying to like load something in, whatever the case is, and I don't even think that is the case half of the time. It is 100% open world, and you don't get a jitter. You don't get a jitter. Honestly, you do not get a moment you think, oh, my game's going to crash. Not a second. Wukong, however, you start the game, and it has, like, a few minor moments, but the further into the game you get, the worse the performance gets. And I've now done it twice, and the game has crashed 100% fully 5 or 6 times, like completely shut me out of the game midway through fighting things. There was one point where I was fighting the secret ending boss, and I was getting my ass handed to me on every occasion. And I had a really good start, and I got him down to about half health, and my game crashed. And I was fuming. I was absolutely livid. There was also a time where I was fighting the same boss, and he hit me against one of the invisible walls, knocked me into the invisible wall, and I couldn't get back to the boss fight, and ended up being able to walk around all of the outside of the map for God knows how long. There's also a video I uploaded on the channel where I was able to get into the wall in the pagoda realm. I've also now found a second place in the same realm that you can get into the wall and get stuck. Yeah, performance-wise, this isn't even slightly close, and it is almost embarrassing just how different these games are, because, like I said, fully open world Shadow of the Erdtree is, and, like, you have a set path, more or less, with Wukong. You have different variations where you can go, but generally it is a set path, and it struggles, really struggles, and I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it's because the PlayStation 5 just isn't ready for it. I'm not sure if the game just wasn't, like, finished in terms of all, like, the bugs and stuff. I really don't know, but it isn't even close, and the helicopter just drove over me again, and I'm scared. Drove over me? Flew over me, whatever it is. Yeah, genuinely not even close. Shadow of the Erdtree, well done. You are an incredible game for how you play. Now let's talk about value. And once again, we got 2 very different games in this category. So we have one game that is a DLC that feels like a completely full game that costs, I think, between £30 and £35, depending on what store you buy it on. Then you've got Wukong, which costs between £50 and £60, again, depending on what store you buy it on. And then you can buy the extra edition, I think, for an extra tenner. I'm not sure how much the extra editions, like the Ultimate editions, were for Shadow of the Erdtree, if I'm being honest with you. But they don't matter so much. What matters right now is the value for just the base game. And the base game wise, so I do have some maths for this. I think it's on my phone, but I'm going to try my hardest to remember now. So to complete Shadow of the Erdtree, it is between 20 and 30 hours. To complete the Wukong story, it is about 30 to 40 hours. But obviously there is a £20 difference in the price of the game. So what then do you kind of give the point to, because obviously you're paying less for a little bit less of a game. However, Wukong then comes with a different aspect, because with Shadow of the Erdtree being a DLC, and because it is FromSoft DLC, they don't give you additional trophies. So once you complete it once, really speaking, you don't ever have to do it again, because it is all for the ego. You don't do it for a trophy, you do it for the ego. Whereas Wukong then has the trophies that you would want to go and get, so it does mean that you'd want to maybe try and get those trophies. So are you paying then for the trophies, or are you paying for the experience? I don't know what I would lean towards. But if I'm going to be honest, and what I think is the most value for money, I think it has to go to Shadow of the Erdtree. Simply because it is pretty much an entire game for the price of a DLC. Like, it really is a game that is bigger than most games that are released, and it's a DLC. So for me, I think the point goes to Shadow of the Erdtree. Again, let me know in the comments if you disagree, but I feel like just the sheer fact that it wasn't even meant to be a full game, yet it feels like a full game and costs half the price, I think that really does speak volumes. So for me, the value, I think it goes to Shadow of the Erdtree. Now let's talk about the one that I think will split the audience the most. And the ninth category is difficulty. For me, this can go one of two ways. Now, if we're talking about the harder game, it's not close. Shadow of the Erdtree is way more difficult. Radahn himself is arguably the hardest boss I've ever seen. Like, he is crazy. And it is, like, it's unfair how crazy he is in the second phase. Like, some of the stuff he does with the lights, and you have to dodge almost twice, one of the hardest things I've ever done. Honestly, I really had to grind for that boss fight. But then if you look at Wukong, generally you run through most bosses. You have maybe a little bit of an issue with a boss here and there, and that is just because sometimes you will just have a moment where you have a boss that you're uncomfortable with. That comes with every game that is like this. The secret ending boss, crazy. Absolutely nuts. But does he compare to any of the bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree? And I'd say, yeah. I'd say he's the only one that felt like he was a FromSoft boss. Like, he felt crazy. So I'd argue that the secret ending boss was genuinely like a really difficult boss. But overall, I think the difficulty spike goes to Shadow of the Erdtree. But how do you give a point there? So you either give it because you like an easier game, or you like a harder game. This really will depend on you. So for me, I like the difficulty. So I'm leaning towards Shadow of the Erdtree. However, Radahn removes some of those points for me, because he also felt like he was just a bit unfair. There were elements that I didn't think were fair within his boss fight. Like, if you go against Melania is crazy difficult. But, again, you knew that it was a fair fight. Whereas it doesn't feel fair with Radahn on a lot of aspects. But then you go to Wukong, and there's not really many points where you feel like it's unfair. There are fights that are a little bit more difficult, but nothing's really unfair. Other than some bosses just don't stop moving. But I mean, that is what it is at the end of the day. You just got to make sure you're moving. So for me, I'm going to give the point to Shadow of the Erdtree. I was originally going to give the point to Wukong for the fact that I liked the fact that you could just run through enemies and feel like a badass. But I then got to think about what I prefer as a player, and I prefer the grind. I really do, and I've learned to love it more and more through playing Elden Ring and Dark Souls. I really do love the grind. So for me, I'm going to give the point to Shadow of the Erdtree. But I do think there's a lot of people out there that would give the point to Wukong. And like I said, please let me know in the comments what your opinion is, because I think that is one of the most highly debated ones out of all of this list for who could get the point. But, oh god, I've kicked the camera. How bad have I kicked that camera? I'm going to move it ever so slightly. I kicked it. I haven't kicked it before, but I've kicked it this time. Whatever. It might be back. If it's not back, I'm going to lean over here. So yeah, for me, the difficulty, I think, goes to Shadow of the Erdtree. But I think, again, anyone could take the point if they really wanted the point. So the final category is replayability. Now, truth be told, this is quite a difficult one to choose between for multiple reasons. A, Shadow of the Erdtree does not have trophies. So you don't need to replay it if you don't want to replay it. Wukong, you have to play through it just under 2 times. Like, you get to the last chapter, and you can have everything. So Wukong, really speaking, should take the point because of the fact of you have to replay it. However, Wukong is far more linear, so you have to play it in order. Whereas Shadow of the Erdtree, you can play it in multiple different orders. So it is a really quite difficult point to give, because arguably they're both not that fun to replay. And that's probably controversial as hell. Elden Ring, I've completed Elden Ring 7 times. Loved it. Every second I loved it, because I could play it how I wanted to play it. I could really go around and do whatever I wanted. And I've even got to the point where I've got every single piece of armor and piece of clothing in Elden Ring. Every single weapon. I've literally got, like, the completion on Elden Ring is unreal for me. It's the most I've ever done in a game. I've got everything you can get. I started doing that in Shadow of the Erdtree, and maybe I burnt myself out from doing it from Elden Ring, but it just didn't feel as fun. Then you go to Wukong, and I've just finished doing the trophies, and to do the trophies, there were certain elements that really just felt like a horrible grind. For example, seeds. To get the seeds, you've got to go picking. You've got to go picking trees and plants and stuff until the RNG gives you a seed. Mate, you've got to wait half an hour in real life time for those plants to regrow. So just imagine what that's like. It is just soul crushing. Then you've got to get all of the armor pieces, and there's a lot of masks that you get from certain enemies that drop the masks. But again, RNG. So, I mean, I spent multiple hours on one enemy just to get his mask. Crazy. Overall, I think they both lack the fun element when it comes to replayability. And maybe I'm being quite harsh. No, you know what? I am being harsh. I'm leaning too much towards completion. I think I need to ignore the completion element and just talk about if you just want to replay the game. If I'm being honest, which game would I rather play again? I think Wukong. If I'm being honest. I really enjoyed Shadow of the Erdtree. And like I said, I like the fact that you can do it in multiple different ways. But if I'm going to go down the route of which one I preferred to play back, I think I prefer to play back Wukong, simply because it's a lot smaller when you're just running through it. If you're just running through it, I mean, I was done on the Wukong the second time within, I think, about 6 hours. Like, you really can fly through the game if you just go straight for each boss that you know which direction you got to go in, and you're only doing it to pick up, like, specific trophies. If you want to replay it as a whole, obviously it can take a lot longer. But I think overall the most fun one to play, I really am quite stuck on this one. I don't know who to give the point to. I'm going to give the point for replayability. I'm going to give it to Wukong. For one reason and one reason alone, is that you have to replay it. And the story, the way the story goes and the way the story ends, kind of feeds into restarting the game. And I think they're not, because sorry, I do apologize. There's elements to restarting the story that don't make sense, and I will be honest. It is a carbon copy. You play the game exactly the same again. The story's told exactly the same again. Even though the way it ends makes it seem like it would be different, and I thought the opening like cutscene would have like an element referring to you as like whatever. Yeah, they're both great games. I think replayability. I think Wukong gets the point simply because you want to chase the trophies. Whereas Shadow of the Erdtree, you don't get that satisfaction. You just play it again for ego. And I agree. I think it's a brilliant game, and I really enjoyed playing it again. But fighting Radahn again was crazy. So, yeah, I'm gonna give the point to Wukong, but it is fractional. It is fractional because personally, I think Shadow of the Erdtree is better overall. And going off this list now, I mean, what is it? 4 to 6 or 3 to 7? Like, Shadow of the Erdtree is miles better than Wukong when it comes to a category-based, like, vision of what you want from a game. So, I think Game of the Year, really speaking, off merit and off paper, Shadow of the Erdtree deserves it. And if I'm being honest, I think Wukong is going to win it. Not because it deserves it, and maybe it does, but I think based alone on the way the game plays, the story that it tells, and how it tells that story, I think it's different enough to give it Game of the Year. And I wouldn't be mad, if I'm being honest with you. I really wouldn't be mad. I think overall the better game is 100% Shadow of the Erdtree, but that could be simply because it is just Elden Ring, but just added on to. But I do think Wukong is going to win it. I think Wukong will get Game of the Year. But I also think that Shadow of the Erdtree is definitely a better game. But I need your opinions, guys. I need to know what you guys think. I want to know if you agree with me. If you think that Wukong is going to win it, but you also think that Shadow of the Erdtree is better. If you think Wukong is better, I'm more than happy to hear what you guys think. And I actually really want to start a conversation. So, yeah. That was a really quite, like, there's certain categories that weren't even, like, questionable. But there were elements that I really did struggle with within this rating of the two games. But I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad that I've got an idea of myself. And I personally, like, Elden Ring is one of my favourite games that I've ever played. Possibly even my favourite. But Shadow of the Erdtree did feel like it was the ultimate add-on, but also it didn't feed that itch as much as I wanted it to. Still phenomenal. Still absolutely phenomenal. But I would have preferred to go down the Godfrey storyline a bit more. But maybe that's what we get with Elden Ring 2. I got a funny feeling this is going to be a trilogy, but we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, I'm going to say that the better game is Shadow of the Erdtree and Game of the Year is Wukong. But that's where I'm going to leave it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for waiting on me. I apologise. My 10 days was not 10 days off. I promise you. It was 10 days of streaming, which I make sure I put my streaming line on here. It's on Twitch. Let me know if you want me to stream on YouTube. At the moment, I'm streaming on Twitch because I feel like it is meant to be a better experience. But I'm obviously a nobody on Twitch right now, so it's kind of one of those things that I'm streaming to no one, and I was going to take the gameplay from Twitch and put it onto YouTube, but I haven't done that yet, partly because I've been so busy and I've been so drained, and yeah, so let me know what you guys think, but remember to like the video if you like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers!
If you enjoyed that video, why not subscribe?
If you enjoyed that video, why not subscribe? It'll help me and Natty continue to do the work that we're doing, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Thanks!